Welcome to the first episode in a Legendarium series about the Gutenberg Press. In this episode, 1436 to 1468, we will cover the early life and education of Johann Gutenberg. As he started his career, metalsmiths across Europe were experimenting with new printing presses. Using his own wine press model, Gutenberg was able to produce 180 copies of the Bible, collectively known as the Gutenberg Bible. But just as his own invention sparked off a wave of invention that triggered a revolution in printing across Europe, the inventor died in relative poverty. Though he was one of the most important men in world history, we know relatively little about Johannes Geinfleisch zum Gutenberg. He was born between 1394 and 1404 in Mainz, located in the Holy Roman Empire, modern-day Germany. His family were minor aristocrats, yet lacked the money to live in idleness. His father, Friel Geinfleisch, worked in the ecclesiastical mint. Young Johann received his education working alongside his father as a goldsmith's apprentice. As he grew to adulthood, a 1411 craftsman revolt against the ruling aristocracy forced the Gutenberg family to flee to Eltville am Rhein, where his mother had an estate. There, he saw the Rhenish wine presses, which helped to inspire his own printing press. 7 years later, in 1418, Gutenberg enrolled at the University of Erfurt and learned how to read and write in German and Latin, the latter being the language of scholars and churchmen. As Gutenberg began his career as a metalsmith, Europe had no real printing industry as we know it today. Each book had to be individually handwritten. They were rare and expensive. Only the most privileged people could afford books, which also meant that few knew how to read or write. The University of Cambridge boasted one of the largest libraries in Europe, with only 122 books. Indeed, book parchment was so expensive that outdated books were not thrown away. Rather, scribes scraped off old text with knives and then wrote in the new text. As Gutenberg began his career in Strasbourg, he became one of many European metalsmiths experimenting with printing. The first breakthrough came with woodcut printing on paper around 1423. Printers carved text and images into the surface of a wood block with a knife or chisel. Then they inked in the wood block with ink made from oil lamp soot mixed with varnish or linseed oil. Covered with so-called lampblack, the printers pressed the block against a page and then an artist painted in the images. In the 1430s, Gutenberg secured funding from a wealthy businessman named Andreas Dritzhahn. Gutenberg did not invent a wholly new technology, but combined existing technologies. Beginning in 1436, Johann Gutenberg began working on a wooden press with movable metal type that used relief printing, like woodcuts. A frame held columns of individual letters set in lead. After inking the type, Gutenberg pressed a sheet of paper on top, and by moving a large handle, Gutenberg applied enough pressure to transfer the ink from the press to the parchment. He likely got this basic design from Rhenish wine presses used for centuries in Germany. Movable type had already been used in Asia and had almost certainly become known in Europe via trade routes. However, Gutenberg combined these two concepts to create something new. Even better, he created a molding system that allowed a printer to produce lead letters in enough numbers to print entire books. As with many things about Gutenberg, we don't know when he parted ways with Dritzhahn. Yet over the next decade, he made enough progress to seek additional funds from a new investor named Johann Faust. Gutenberg even took Faust's son-in-law Peter Schoeffer as his apprentice. In 1448, Gutenberg set up shop back home in Mainz. Using a modified wine press, Gutenberg rolled ink over the raised surfaces of movable, hand-set block letters within a wooden frame, and then pressed them against paper. Among his first publications are the Poem of the Last Judgment and the Calendar for 1448. However, Gutenberg's great dream was to print the Bible, which he believed would spread and strengthen Christianity. While he toiled in Mainz, the city of Constantinople was taken by the Ottoman Turks. Its library was burned, carried away, or sold off. According to lore, some of the Greco-Roman texts found their way into the Tsar's library when an imperial princess named Zoe married Grand Prince Ivan III of Russia. So Gutenberg's work took on even greater importance. In 1455, Gutenberg printed 180 copies of a 42-line Bible called the Gutenberg Bible. The first mass-produced book, it was set in Gothic type, and customers could have their copies decorated manually for a price. Yet, in a tragic irony, Gutenberg went bankrupt that same year when Johann Faust foreclosed on the mortgage used to finance the press. Faust seized the printing equipment and existing copies of the Gutenberg Bible. While trying to sell the Bibles in Paris, Faust tried to keep the printing press a secret and pass off the Bibles as hand-copied. When his customers noticed the identical script, they accused Faust of witchcraft. To avoid prosecution, he had to confess to his scheme. Gutenberg likely continued working in printing through the 1450s, though he endured the humiliation of working under Peter Schoeffer, his former apprentice who received his assets on a silver platter from Johann Faust. However, Gutenberg's invention spread like wildfire. Faust and Schoeffer, with Gutenberg's help, produced the first color printing in 1457, the Main Psalter, a collection of psalms made for the local bishop. They used a second color to highlight certain words, rather than make full-color images. The Psalter also became one of the first books to contain a colophon, a page that described the printer, his location, and the book's year of publication. In 1461, Albrecht Pfister combined the Gutenberg press with woodcuts to produce the first illustrated books, a collection of fables called Der Edelstein and the Biblia Pauperum, which included hand-colored illustrations. Gutenberg presses made 3,600 pages per workday compared to 40 by hand printing and just a few pages by hand copying. Yet the industry still had to distribute all these works. This led to book fairs, the most important being the Frankfurt Book Fair, held by local booksellers soon after Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. Not long after, men discovered the power of the Gutenberg press to spread criticism of authority. Sometime in the 1460s, a monk named Ulrich Hahn had to leave Vienna after he printed a lampoon against the corrupt mayor, who in turn ordered the destruction of his press. Hahn then brought the press to Italy, where it produced the first book in the Italian language, Il Canzoniere, in 1470. In Brugge, yet another improvement to the Gutenberg press came from Collard Mansion, who created engravings. These were metal plates incised by tools called burins. After warming these plates, Mansion applied the ink so it became fluid, filling in the tiny holes and lines. Next, Mansion swiped off the surface so only the nooks and crannies remained filled with ink. He then pressed a moistened paper sheet on the plate, and it picked up the ink from the drawing. While slower than woodcut printing, the stronger metal engravings allowed for more printings per plate and allowed for more detailed drawings. Already, the Gutenberg Revolution was picking up steam. Yet Gutenberg's life became much worse in 1462 when Mainz was sacked by King Adolf II. Like Faust, Schoeffer, and many other Mainz citizens, Johann Gutenberg was reduced to sleeping in the streets. Based on his previous work for the Bishop of Mainz, Gutenberg petitioned for a pension. In time, he received it and retired, having gone blind by that time. He died in 1468 in relative poverty, yet his achievement became a legacy that he left to the world. His innovations, including punch cutting, matrix fitting, typecasting, composing, and printing, allowed for books to be printed on a scale never seen before and for knowledge to spread like it never had before. And that wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.